Welcome to the Fantasy Football Happy Hour. I'm Connor Rogers alongside Matthew Berry, Jay Croucher, our second show of the new season here, guys, and already a ton of news flying in. On today's show, we're going to get through the latest on Christian McCaffrey's training camp injury. Brandon Aiyuk trade rumors are all over the place right now, guys. 10 big quarterback storylines as well is how we're going to close this thing out. We'll go through the household names, of course, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, but some of the deeper cuts as well. Especially Bryce Young. We'll see if he can bounce back in his second season as well.
Way to tease it, by the way. If anything's going to keep someone tuned in, it's like, the boys are going to talk about Bryce Young.
You like that? Well, I didn't want to give away the sneaky names.
I'm not clicking out of that. I don't care what YouTube's showing me on the side.
There we go. You want to
top 10 news bloopers? Screw that.
There we go, Matthew. Yeah. All right. So with that, let's jump right to the Rotoworld Player news, because now it's Panic City already, because Christian McCaffrey will miss the preseason with the calf strain. Obviously unlikely for him to even play in an actual preseason game, but from Kyle Shanahan, he said he might miss a couple weeks. There's no indications yet he's in danger of missing week 1. But for a guy that's the 101 quite often, Matthew, this just doesn't make you feel good.
Well, especially given his injury history. Obviously, He's been great the last couple of years, but there were 2 years there during his dominant run as the fantasy 101 where he just missed majority of the season. And so I think there are still fantasy managers there that are a little gun shy based on that. Also keep in mind that, he's coming off a season where he had well over 300 touches, where he was just, he had a massive workload. The 49ers went to the Super Bowl. I think you could make an argument that if Kittle and Debo don't get hurt in that game, maybe they win that game. I mean, they lost it in overtime, right? And so they're sitting here thinking about not an 18-week season. They're thinking about like a 22, 23-week season if you're Kyle Shanahan. So they're trying to pace their players out. So you could certainly see like a reduced workload, which ultimately is fine, by the way. If you guarantee me 17 touches from Christian McCaffrey and the Niners every week, I will sign up for that, right? Like, I'm not worried about the reduced workload, but I think there's certainly some concern. Having said that, I'm not moving him off my 101 just yet. I am, though, however, keeping an eye on it. Soft tissue injuries with running backs, especially ones named Christian McCaffrey.
He's had them before.
He's had them before, makes me a little nervous. I think the bigger question here, Jay, for me, is sort of like if you want insurance on McCaffrey, if you use the 101 or a top 5 pick, because he's not getting outside the top 5, even if somebody in your league is like, too many bad vibes for me, and I'm going to go with Tyreek or CD or whatever, or Breece Hall, whoever somebody might go with. There's no way McCaffrey's getting outside the top 5 in any real league. So if you do draft Christian McCaffrey with a top 5 pick, are you drafting an insurance back? And then who is it? Because you've got Elijah Mitchell there, the rookie Isaac
Guerendo.
Guerendo. Thank you, Connor. Thank God that you're here for this. I
gotta help out somehow.
Thank you, Guerendo, and my guy Jordan Mason. I actually love Jordan Mason. I thought he was impressive last year when he got a shot. Jay, like, are you drafting all of them? Or are you just drafting one with a dart throw and trying to hope? Where do you see that playing out?
Doesn't it feel like everyone will, over the next couple of weeks, debate between themselves about Elijah Mitchell or Jordan Mason, and then Matt Breida is just the guy? It just seems like Matt Breida is always destined to fill that role. I think just with the way that Kyle Shanahan has talked about the situation in the past month or so, he doesn't seem particularly enamored of Elijah Mitchell and just the injuries that Elijah Mitchell has dealt with. And just subjectively, for me, I just prefer Jordan Mason and his upside and the idea that he could step into that role if McCaffrey isn't good to go. But I mean, ultimately, they are dart throws, either of those guys, or if you're going with Isaac Guerendo. But with McCaffrey, to me, the most interesting thing is that he had this same injury in week 17 last year against the Commanders. Then he missed time. He was out for effectively 3 weeks because they had the bye. And then he came back in the playoffs and he was just Christian McCaffrey, right? He plays 3 playoff games, 59 carries, 20 catches, just does Christian McCaffrey stuff. So I think there's 2 aspects to that where, one, it's good that he was able to come back from the calf strain and just be himself. But 2, it's bad that he had a calf strain within the past 4 games that he's played effectively. So that would be the concern, is that he's 28. He has dealt with all this soft tissue stuff before, and calf strains are the ones that tend to get re-aggravated as much as any. So I don't think it's like a 5-alarm fire yet, but certainly one to monitor, and just to make sure if you are drafting McCaffrey, that you want to take another Niners back, certainly, and not forget about that.
And it's got to be fluid, guys, because sifting through this backfield, McCaffrey's the latest injury. Guarendo's still working his way back from a hamstring. Elijah Mitchell has been missing practice. And then you brought up Matt Breida, Jay, who's thrown into the fire out of this. So, like, how do you have an answer right now, Matthew, on who is the guy when most of them, 3 out of the 4 of them, aren't even practicing right now?
I think hopefully it's Kyle Shanahan. He'll mix and match guys, but I think the one thing the McCaffrey injury does is, like, he probably wasn't going to play in the preseason that much anyway, if at all, but he now definitely isn't. And so hopefully what we can see is, like, all right, well, they're going to do at least a couple of series with the ones, right? At some point. So you can sort of see who gets work. Is it Mitchell? Is it Mason? I sort of lean towards Mason too, because I agree with Jay. Like, I know Mitchell's been effective when he's been in there, but he just can't get in there, right? You can't make the club from the tub, I believe is the old saying. And that seems to really be the case with Elijah Mitchell. I also have Jordan Mason like on 3 different dynasty teams. So I'm also like, I'm trying to will this into existence, but I think we will have more insight into this as the preseason goes on, and we sort of see what they do with their first team offense, or don't. You know what I mean? Like if they roll out a bunch of scrubs, right? If Purdy's out and Debo's out and Kittle's out and Jordan Mason's out, that sort of tells you something too, right? So so we'll sort of see how that all plays out. But I think that if you were doing drafts between now and the start of the season, you're probably knocking Christian McCaffrey a little bit. But just remember, like, even if he misses 3 games, he was so much better than every other player last year. Like, he was 100 points better than every player. Like, just the upside of McCaffrey, I think, is worth it, personally.
Yeah. I think, firstly, I'm glad you've renewed You Can't Make the Club from the Tub for season 2 after you debuted it very suspiciously last year. I'm not sure that is an actual saying, at least one that I've not heard. And then secondly, the thing
is it false, though?
It's an American.
Tell me I'm wrong, Jay Croucher. Jay Croucher, I'm asking you directly. Can you, in fact, make the club from the tub? You tell me.
I don't know. It makes it more difficult to make the club from the tub. That
Thank
is
you.
Without question. But speaking of, I think it's the one other thing here is that we saw the Elijah Mitchell backup experience last year, and he couldn't make the club onto the field because in games that mattered, Christian McCaffrey was playing like 100% of the snaps, which I think tells you a little bit about what Shanahan might think of Elijah Mitchell, coupled with his lukewarm comments about Mitchell this offseason. So I just think that if you want upside, and ultimately, like, that's what you want. Like, you're shooting for upside. When you're drafting, draft to win your league. You can go for the home run. I think that Jordan Mason is a bit more upside. And so he would be the guy I would lean towards.
Jordan Mason invested in a $3,000 jugs machine this offseason, guys. If we're looking for some hope from him, you love to hear it. More Niners news. The Niners news doesn't stop. NBC Bay Area's Matt Mayoko reports the 49ers have agreed to the framework of a Brandon Aiyuk trade. It was originally with the Patriots and the Browns. We know Adam Schefter has updated the Patriots decided not to further explore any trade possibilities. It sounds like the Steelers maybe could be back in this, guys. The bottom line is, Matthew, this is trending towards Brandon Aiyuk will not be with the 49ers, which isn't probably good news if you love Brandon Aiyuk in fantasy.
It's not got good news. Let's start with the idea that Aiyuk isn't on the 49ers. So, right, you up Debo a little bit, you up George Kittle a little bit. Suddenly, Juwan Jennings,
Rick Pearsall
and Ricky Pearsall. I'd actually but given how complicated Shanahan's offense is, and Pearsall's been a little banged up, I actually think Juwan Jennings, who, by the way, might have been their best player in the Super Bowl. I mean, everyone's laughing about Juwan Jennings, but seriously, like Juwan Jennings, I think that in that offense, and I mean, Juwan Jennings, I thought actually had a hell of a Super Bowl, and I think he would suddenly he's on the sleeper radar. I know Ricky Pearsall's the name and the hot rookie, but he's been banged up a little bit. And I would think that at least to start the season, Jennings would get a run ahead of Pearsall. So I think that's what happens there. And you knock Purdy down a little bit in terms of what would happen there. And certainly Brandon Aiyuk going to any system that isn't San Francisco, especially the ones that are rumored, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and the Patriots, you don't love any of those situations better than the Niners. Now, I have a little bit of insight into this. A little birdie told me a couple of different things here. And so I think, and you can sort of put this together if you've seen all the different reports, and Matt Maiocco doing a great job. Other reports have been out there as well. Schefter reporting the Patriots are now out of it. But in essence, it's two different things. Aiyuk wants to be paid. So the team that he has to basically say, yes, if you, insert team, decides to trade for me, I will sign a long-term extension with you. So that needs to be negotiated. But then the Niners also have to say, like, okay, well, if we're giving up this asset that we really like in Brandon Aiyuk, we need a haul back. And so from what I've been able to piece together, both from my sources and from what you read online, is in essence, basically, Aiyuk wanted to go to the Steelers. But the Steelers were like, the Niners, asked for whatever they asked for, and the Steelers didn't want to pay it. Meanwhile, the Niners were able to get a deal done, or the framework of a deal done, with both the Patriots and the Browns, but Aiyuk didn't want to go to those teams. Mary Kay Cabot reporting this as well. Maiocco had this as well, but basically that if the Browns deal happens, and I guess that's still apparently alive, Amari Cooper would be going from Cleveland to San Francisco. And so then you sort of just see a swap there. And I actually think, Amari Cooper, I feel like, honestly, better quarterback play, but, more competition for targets, but better quarterback play. Amari Cooper would sort of say the same. And I think you'd feel better about Aiyuk in Cleveland with Deshaun Watson than you would, and Kevin Stefanski as his coach, than you would in New England or Pittsburgh with Arthur Smith calling the plays. So I think if you're an Aiyuk manager, if you've already drafted and he's on your team, or you have a dynasty, I think that's what you're hoping for, because it doesn't look like he's suiting up for the Niners this season, at least as we sit here today. Pittsburgh maybe comes back, maybe they renegotiate that deal, but that's sort of where it stands. I will also say that although Aiyuk's back at practice, it does not seem like none of this is good. None of this is good, right? I mean, the fact that it's sort of out there and everything like that. Patriots apparently are out of it as well, but and also apparently the Commanders, which I was hoping for, because Aiyuk and Jayden Daniels are very close. Obviously, Adam Peters, former San Francisco assistant general manager, has a lot of ties to John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. They've made trades before a couple of different times where we've gotten fleeced on Trent Williams and Chase Young. So I was hoping that Aiyuk would show up in a Commander's uniform, but that apparently is also off the table.
Yeah, I think the thing with Aiyuk is that it's interesting, just the push and pull between his efficiency is clearly going to go down if he leaves Brock Purdy and the Shanahan system and all the other weapons that the Niners have to take attention away from Aiyuk. But his volume will go up basically anywhere he goes. Last year, Brandon Aiyuk was 36th in the NFL in targets. He had one more target all of last season than Elijah Moore. He had 7 more targets than Tyler Boyd. Meanwhile, he was 7th in the NFL in receiving yards at over 1,300. So again, if he goes to the Browns, that to me is the most compelling situation, because all of a sudden that offense becomes just the weirdest, most high variance offense in the entire NFL. You have Nick Chubb coming back at some point. You have Deshaun Watson, who we still have no idea if he's any good or not. And we have a new offensive coordinator in Ken Dorsey, who allegedly is going to play more shotgun, increase the pace. Deshaun allegedly looks good at camp. So there are all these competing factors, but I think it's probably a net positive if Aiyuk gets traded there, just because of the volume and the upside, where now there are worlds where he could be, the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy. That's on the table, and it's probably not on the table in San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, Amari Cooper averaged over 8 targets a game last year, had 128 total there. And so, Connor, our guy Cedric Tillman having a nice camp as well, and whatever. And they've got some other guys there. I know they've always been trying to get Elijah Moore going as well. You've got Nick Chubb, but I agree with you. Like I think that's the best case scenario. Pittsburgh feels like it's gonna be run heavy. I guess the argument there would be if it doesn't seem like Pickens would be the guy that would it doesn't seem like Pickens would be the guy that would go back to San Francisco if the Steelers trade happens. So I guess what you're hoping there is volume. And again, to your point, he doesn't need a ton of volume to be productive. I like this stat as well. Last year, only Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb had more receptions of 20 or more yards than Brandon Aiyuk. And as you mentioned, like he just didn't get a lot of looks. You know, it was a run-heavy offense. There were a lot of mouths to feed in San Francisco. So, like, when he got looks, he was very productive, incredibly talented player. Tough contract situation right now in San Francisco. We'll see how it all plays out.
Our last bit of news here, guys, sticking with the wide receivers. Pro Football Talks Mike Florio believes Jordan Addison will eventually face a 3-game suspension for his July DUI arrest. Addison's hearing has been set for October 7th. So, Jay, I mean, we've seen these things really, really drag out over the years in terms of when the league gets involved and actually enforcing any kind of suspension. Obviously, Florio's hinting at that it'll be a 3-game suspension, but it's kind of a wild card if that suspension is going to impact this year or a following year.
Absolutely. I mean, this could get dragged out for a long time. There's no real clarity around that. Obviously, you have to downgrade Addison somewhat just for the possibility that he could be missing time this season. But I mean, there's no one who is, to me, super attractive in the Vikings wide receiver depth chart. There's also just the added uncertainty of TJ Hawkinson, when he's going to come back, what he's going to look like. To me, all this points to is that I think that people are, and it's weird to call this guy underrated, but I think people are sleeping a little bit on Justin Jefferson.
I agree.
And just the insane amount of targets he's going to gobble up. And I think that he's going to get more competent quarterback play than he did towards the end of last season when it was the Nick Mullins, Jaron Hall show. Jefferson didn't get really to play much with Josh Dobbs at all. So I think that Jefferson, if I was taking wide receiver 1, I guess like CD Lamb might have the highest floor just because he has Dak and he plays in a dome. But I think Jefferson, it's very much on the table that he repeats being wide receiver 1 that he was a couple of years ago. But Connor, I'm just interested in terms of like the depth on this team at receiver. Do you think that Sam Darnold, who looks like is probably going to be the starter, do you think he is salvageable where he can turn some of these second-tier receivers into guys?
In Kevin O'Connell's offense, it obviously sets a higher floor for Sam, but I lean more with you that this is just going to be Justin Jefferson's show all the way. And the fact is, for me, assuming he's healthy, I think they're going to throw the ball a lot to Aaron Jones as well. I don't really look at the wide receiver room and get excited over the depth of that when Hawkinson's been ahead of his rehab timeline. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because it was a late injury, but he's been ahead of schedule. They bring in Aaron Jones because, quite frankly, besides the outside zone running game that O'Connell loves to run and Jones fits that, they could throw him the ball as well. So, Jay, I think it's just funneled differently where it's an uptick for Jefferson. It's more on the plate for Aaron Jones. And when Hawkinson's ready, we know he's the guy, the number 2 guy in the offense. What do you think, Matthew?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the NFL, we saw this with the Alvin Kamara case as well. The NFL is reluctant to hand down any sort of suspension until the legal process plays out. So you're mentioning the court case isn't until October. There's always a chance that gets delayed, that lawyers file, motions to, all sorts of motions that it gets delayed and pushed and everything like that. And then regardless of how that court case plays out, is there an appeal process, etc. So there's a chance that there is not a decision in his legal case until the season is over or until close to the season is over, at which point the NFL may say, you know what, we're just going to wait until the offseason. They are generally reluctant to hand out suspensions, right? And so I think there's a better than average chance that Jordan Addison doesn't miss any games this year due to suspension. Eventually he will. But so I don't know. If I'm in best ball and like you're thinking about the playoffs and maybe he's not there at the end of the season, okay, fine. But sort of feels like if you're in redraft leagues and you're wanting to take a flyer on somebody in the Vikings offense, because Addison did have some real nice moments last year. And obviously there's going to be less target competition this season, worse quarterback play, but we expect whether it's Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy, we expect Kevin O'Connell to get that offense going. It's still going to be a pass first offense. I don't mind Jordan Addison. I actually think this might sleeper is strong, but I do think this might make him a little bit of a value because people may devalue him because of this news. And I'm sort of like, I guess for me, it wouldn't affect how I draft Jordan Addison this year in redraft leagues.
Yeah, it's a classic case of that little note card or red flag in your draft, and people just kind of wave their arms and say no when it could be a minor situation for him on the field. Fantasy football just got better this season, $1 million better. Create or join a private Yahoo Fantasy League and enter the $1 million NBC sweepstakes. Plus, earn extra entries to win when players on your roster score a touchdown during an opening weekend game on NBC or Peacock. Download the redesigned Yahoo Fantasy app or go to NBCSports.com/fantasy million to learn more. All right, fellas, let's jump into the top quarterback storylines in fantasy this season. And we'll start with the man that is coming off another Super Bowl victory, but also off of a career low 17.5 points.
I have a question for you guys. I need a ruling on this. Before we get into the quarterback storylines, I just need a ruling for you guys. So I'm in a dynasty league, right? I'm in a dynasty league with a bunch of my buddies from ESPN. And in this dynasty league is producer Damien, who is right now behind the scenes. And so in our dynasty league, there have been no offseason moves all year long. And then what we had is, the commissioner sent out, shout out Scott Clark, all biz. Scott Clark sends out an email yesterday saying like, hey, we're going to do fab bids. And like at noon Eastern, then, I'll roll all. And then once the fab bids are all in, then it's first come, first serve, free agents are open. So my phone is blowing up because producer Damien is going crazy. While in theory, he's producing our show, going crazy, picking up a bunch of players right now. I'm just curious your thoughts on this.
That's the greatness
Damien
of
just
Damien
added.
Dabrowski.
He just added Bo Melton. He just added Cedric Tillman. Just added Jonnu Smith. Again, it's it's a very deep dynasty league. But and all these players have been gone for a long time. 12-team league, 25-man rosters, no IR spot.
Damien said these claims are from last night and that you're blatantly lying right now.
I disagree. I'm doing it right now. It's clear. It's popping up on my phone. It's just I'm paying attention to the show. Would I have liked Cedric Tillman or Jonnu Smith? Sure. I put
stayed up late.
Because I'm doing the show. Damn it.
You had to get
I picked up.
You had to go to bed early for a almost noon taping.
Yeah. Well, we could have pushed it back. I thought, well, at least Damien is busy too. He's not going to beat me to any players because he's going to be busy producing the show, but apparently not. He just hit record and walked away.
Wow. Accusations of not doing one's job to focus on Bo Melton.
Bo Melton.
That's the best part.
I mean, I'm bitter because I put in bids on Cedric Tillman and Jonnu Smith as well. I did get. I'm curious what you think, Connor, and then we'll get into storylines. But just as we talk a little bit of camp news, I did manage to win Dylan Lobb in the Raiders camp.
Well, first off, it's Lobby, but
Lobby, sure.
Still, no, that's exciting. Good pass catcher in a very thin backfield. How high?
They seem to like him a lot. They're talking him up. Antonio Pierce feels like he's talking him up, and Zamir White had 4 good games, right?
Yeah. Well, and somebody's got to be the other guy. It can't just be Zamir White all the time.
Correct.
Not bad.
Probably not.
So yeah. It's half PPR, but still. Dylan Lobby. There we go. All right, good.
Yeah. By the way, anyone who wagered on Cedric Tillman's name being said over 4.5 times this show, you're only one away from cashing that over, which is ridiculous.
You could have got an alt line at plus 1,200, and you're killing it.
What do you think? Somebody who gets mentioned first in this show, Patrick Mahomes or Cedric Tillman? It's one of those, first to 25 kind of bets, first to 20.
I remember season 1 of this show, we once spent 11.5 minutes on Kenyon Drake. So Cedric Tillman's very much up our avenue.
It was like Ravens Kenyon Drake too. Not,
yeah.
The show hasn't been around that long. So, all right, guys, Patrick Mahomes, the bottom line is QB 10 finish last year, Matthew, career low in points per game. I mean, this Chiefs offense is going to look different this year, obviously, with the additions they made. Does he return to fantasy stardom?
He does, and it's weird to call Patrick Mahomes a sleeper because obviously he's not.
It's different in fantasy, though.
But but he is. I've seen him go 3, 4, 5 at quarterback. Most people see Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts seem to go 1, 2 in almost every draft that I've seen so far, that I've been in so far. But I've seen people take Lamar. I've seen people take Anthony Richardson over him.
Did Lawrence do that? That sounds like Lawrence. That was Lawrence.
Yeah, of course. But I've seen him even if he goes 3rd or 4th, he's going lower in the overall as well. I think this is a mistake. Again, think about what the Chiefs did this offseason, right? I mean, they Patrick Mahomes last year just chucked it deep a ton. The problem was, whether it was Sky Moore or Justin Watson or whoever, Marquise Valdez-Scantling, they couldn't come down with it. So,
Daniel Day-Lewis doing an MVS impersonation.
Thank you very much for your consideration. But, obviously, drafting, signing Marquise Hollywood Brown, I think is exciting. Another year of Rashee Rice. Again, we're going to see what happens if he gets suspended, but they should have Rashee Rice for the majority of the season, maybe if not all of it. And then why am I blank?
Xavier Worthy.
Xavier, thank you. God, I'm like, why am I blanking on who they drafted? Xavier Worthy, obviously, who is just absolutely fantastic as well. So, and having a strong camp. And then you've got Travis Kelce, and you got my boy Isaiah Pacheco. So there's a lot of weapons for Patrick Mahomes. But I think what's encouraging again is just last year he had a bad year fantasy wise last year. But in terms of what they were doing until they sort of switched towards the end of the year where they just said, screw it, we're just going to have to run the ball and play good defense. Like they were still chucking it deep, just they weren't connecting on plays. And so they've kind of reloaded and say, all right, we're going to get them guys that can not only get open deep, but can catch the ball.
Yeah. And 2022, Patrick Mahomes didn't have any wide receivers. His leading wide receivers were Juju Smith-Schuster and Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And he won the MVP, and he was QB1 in fantasy. So he doesn't need elite wide receivers. He just needs a baseline of competence. He didn't get that last year. He should get that this year.
Jay, how about Jalen Hurts? When you look at the loss of Jason Kelce, of course, for the tush push, the addition of Saaquon Barkley, which could have an impact on his total red zone touches. Hurts has 10 plus rushing touchdowns in all 3 seasons as the starter. How much did those two aspects, those two changes affect him going into this year from a fantasy perspective?
From a fantasy perspective, I think not great. From a football perspective, I think he'll be fine. And I think he'll be better than he was towards the back end of last year. Like the Eagles were 10-1 and Jalen Hurts was like plus 130 to win MVP. And then the rails, he just went completely off the rails. And I think by spending the amount of money that they did on Saaquon Barkley, you probably don't want to be rushing your franchise quarterback up the middle as much as they did when you have Barkley there. And without Jason Kelce there to execute the tush push, that'll hurt too. But I think that Hurts is going to play better in a football sense this year and maybe have slightly less fantasy volume. But I mean, this is a weird team now because the articles come out, Tim McManus, Jeremy Fowler, the kind of detailing the Sirianni-Hurts relationship and how the offensive coordinator change is perhaps going to bridge that. But I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty around this team, but you would suspect that Hurts's floor is still very high just with the amount of weapons that he has and that offensive line.
I also think he wasn't healthy last year. He just didn't look right. It never really came out. And so I agree with Jay. I think probably if you were, projecting out, you'd say like, all right, probably less rushing touchdowns for Jalen Hurts, but probably better passing. And again, when you dump it off, when you throw a 2-yard, 3-yard dump off to Saaquon Barkley, and then he takes it 25 yards, those all count as passing yards. And so the addition of Kellen Moore as the offense coordinator had so much success with Dak Prescott. And I know it was a tough year for the Chargers last year, but that felt like just a lost situation from top to bottom, obviously. And, Brandon Staley seemed to just lose that team from sort of moment one. So I sort of write that off. I think Kellen Moore is a good offense coordinator. Again, we'll find out. But I think you're right, Jay, that ultimately I think there's a higher floor with Jalen Hurts. He still had, even without the quote, the tush push has sort of become a thing over the last year and a half, but he's had double-digit rushing touchdowns every year he's been in the NFL. And so while it may not be as prevalent as it was last year, I think he'll be better and more efficient as a passer. He's still going to run some. They're still going to use it some. And so he's my QB2. And I feel pretty good about, as a Commanders fan, I don't feel pretty good about it, but I do feel pretty good from a fantasy analysis point that if Jalen Hurts is your starting quarterback, you're in good shape.
Matthew, here's maybe the trickiest one in Anthony Richardson. We're working off small sample size, off of ability and the offense. This is a guy that could be the best quarterback in fantasy. But the problem is all of those things that made him so great in fantasy for a few games also led to him getting hurt for the entire season. What could a full season of Anthony Richardson look like? And do they have to scale back how he played as a rookie?
I don't think they're gonna like what's the Cam Newton quote? You got to let the lion roar or whatever. He's Anthony Richardson. You draft Anthony Richardson because of who he is. He's played he's played a certain style his entire life. He's not going to all of a sudden become like just this drop back, a Kirk Cousins type passer, whatever, Matt Ryan or whatever. He's gonna be Anthony Richardson there. So I don't think he can. He's also, by the way, I feel I feel, and we're going to talk about like Jayden Daniels, for example. Like, I feel less worried about Anthony Richardson getting injured than somebody who's, thinner, skinnier, like a Lamar Jackson or a Jayden Daniels. I mean, like, Anthony Richardson's a big dude. He's
so Josh Allen.
Right. That's exactly right. And so, like, obviously a tough injury last year, but I don't know that's indicative of here's a guy that is quote unquote injury prone. And yes, we have a small sample size from last year, but a year ago, we all liked Anthony Richardson as a sleeper with no sample size. We've now seen the potential and what he can do. And, I think the concern on Anthony Richardson heading into last year was like, okay, we know about the rushing ability and the athletic prowess, but how refined is he going to be as a passer? He really needs to he's really raw as a passer. And I think everyone was sort of pleasantly surprised, like, okay, yes, he can get the ball to Michael Pittman. Yes, he can get the ball to Josh Downs. He can get the ball to his players. And, is he an elite passer? Is he Patrick Mahomes? Not yet, but like, he's not a nothing. Like, I thought he was better as a passer as a rookie than Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson, who both of whom, in their rookie years, the coaches were like, just basically run the ball as much as you can. So I thought it was a much more balanced offense last year. Again, credit to Shane Steichen and what he did there. I am a QB5, guys. I mean, this is somebody who, again, all small sample size, but 24% of his passes went at least 15 yards or more downfield. That would have been top 3 for the season over a full season had he qualified for that, right? He had double-digit rushing attempts in both of his full games last year, over 20 fantasy points in both those games. Again, small sample size, but this is somebody that is willing to run when he gets in close, and willing to chuck it deep. And so he's my QB5. The other point about Richardson here that I think is important is that especially when you're in a 1 QB league, the replacement level is so easy. Richardson is somebody who legitimately a year from now we could be talking about as the number 1 quarterback in fantasy. That's easily within the range of outcomes for Anthony Richardson. And so I don't have a problem taking a swing on that upside, especially given that it's so easy to replace a quarterback in fantasy these days.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is that we kind of forget how big a leap quarterbacks can take in their second year. Yeah. Mahomes' second year, he throws 50 touchdowns, he wins MVP. Lamar Jackson's second year, fresh off like fumbling 50 times against the Chargers in a playoff game, just being unable to hold on to the ball. He takes the league by storm. Ravens go 14-2. He wins MVP unanimously. Jalen Hurts' second full season, he is in the mix to win. He's the favorite to win MVP before he gets hurt late in the year. Now, Look, that's not what the typical quarterback will do, just become an MVP candidate in year 2. But Richardson has that upside. And as you mentioned, Matthew, like he showed, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't crisp as a passer all the time, but he showed flashes of like next level understanding of timing and anticipation. And if I was to place like a speculative flyer on an MVP long shot, like Anthony Richardson in the 30 to 1, 40 to 1 range. Like he's the type of guy, if you're looking for someone to have that Mahomes, Lamar type of leap, I think he's the one just because of just the incredible raw potential.
CJ Stroud coming off a offensive rookie of the year season, Jay, but with Stroud in fantasy, he's just a pure pocket passer. He didn't reach 200 rushing yards last year, but in 14 full games, averaged almost 20 fantasy points per game. So knowing he's a pure pocket passer, Jay, what is the fantasy ceiling for Stroud in an offense that's just dripping with talent and weapons across the board?
Yeah, I don't know why he's a pure pocket passer. Like I always like it when he uses his legs. He had one game against the Jags where he was 6 carries for 47 yards. Think back to that, the semifinal against Georgia as well, where he used his legs really effectively. But seems like that's just not part of his game. And that's fine because the rest of it is amazing. I think with Stroud, obviously it's all there. He's incredible. But the one thing with him is that if you look back through his game log last year, he didn't have to play many great defenses. And when he did, like I think back to the game against the Jets, where the Texans almost got shut out. That was the game that he got concussed late on. And he was like 10 for 23 in that game. He struggled in both games against the Ravens. Now he completely lit up the Browns, who had a great defense, but they're a high variance defense. The Browns also gave up 38 to Gardner Minshew at one point. But Stroud, look, I don't doubt the talent. I don't doubt that he's good. I don't doubt that they're going to throw the ball a little bit more. I thought he was constrained by that last year in the Slowick offense, particularly in that final game against Indianapolis, where it's like, why are you running the ball up the gut? You've got CJ Stroud, and he's just tearing the Colts secondary to shreds. So I think ultimately he is going to take a step forward, but I just wonder with, we still we don't have a massive sample of his career. We don't have a massive sample against elite defenses, against the first place schedule. I think that is going to be offset by the fact that they will throw more, but I don't think he's not nearly as sure of a bet as the guys at the absolute top in terms of guys being drafted.
I think that's fair. I'm at QB6. I think they will be more pass heavy, to your point, than they were last year, where they weren't actually that pass heavy, right? I mean, they were actually pretty balanced on offense, and sort of they eventually let the training wheels come off. But think about this year. He's got not only, so to your point about rookies, or from year 1 to year 2. I mean, we're talking about Richardson, you mentioned. I mean, like, think about Stroud from year 1 to year 2 in a season in which he hopefully has a full season of Tank Dell, a full season of Nico Collins, and then they added Stefon Diggs. And whatever you think of Stefon Diggs last year, and the jury is still out of whether that was the play calling and just some missed plays, or Stefon Diggs has hit a wall over the second. I mean, like, Stefon Diggs was as good as any wide receiver in the NFL in the first half of last year. It was the second half of last year where it just seemed like, where'd Stefon Diggs go? And so hopefully it changes scenery, but Diggs is on a 1-year prove-it deal in Houston, who's going to see a lot more single coverage than he ever did in Buffalo. So I think the knock on Stroud, to your point, is the lack of rushing, which is why I'm at QB6. But I don't know. I don't have a stat for this, but just you watch that guy and you're like,
yeah,
he's him, right? That dude is special. Like, he's just that guy. And so I am, while I would be nervous if you took away the name and you just looked at the stats, I would agree with you, Jay. I think there's things to be nervous about, especially because of the lack of rushing. And generally speaking, to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback, you need to run, and he was very high touchdown variance last year. But my expectation is that I think that dude is just special. And I think what they've done this year, the Texans have done, is to basically set him up for a tremendous amount of success. So I'm in on CJ Stroud. I'm at QB6.
Yeah, there are definitely worlds where CJ Stroud, we're talking about him as the biggest threat to Mahomes in terms of being the best player in football this time next year. That's absolutely on the cards. And even in the bad games that he had statistically, I don't think he played poorly against the Ravens in that playoff loss. Like, they were really banged up along the offensive line, which should be better. Tank Dell going down obviously hurt. Yeah, I think CJ Stroud is a monster. I just don't think he probably on average has the upside that Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen do fantasy-wise, just because of the rushing.
Right now, guys, Dak Prescott is typically the 10th or 11th quarterback off the board in drafts, depending where you play. But last year, Dak, a top 5 finish. He was QB4 in points per game last season. He was QB1 over his final 12 games. Matthew, are people simply forgetting how good Dak was and is? Because I understand if he's not being drafted as a top 5 quarterback, but hovering around being the 10th quarterback taken is a steep drop.
Especially when you think about, look, as you guys know, I am not the biggest Dak Prescott real-life quarterback fan. But I do think that the public narrative of Dak sort of choking in the playoffs, choking in big moments, has clouded people in terms of what his fantasy prospects are. Now, the one thing about Dak is that he stopped running. Early in his career, this was a guy that was good for, 6 rushing touchdowns a year. And over the past 3 seasons, he's got 4 rushing touchdowns total. So that has stopped. But to your point, all they do is throw. And there's nothing that you've seen this offseason that makes you think that all of a sudden they're going to go run heavy. They let Tony Pollard leave. They didn't address the position in the draft, really. And their backfield is like Ezekiel Elliott, who they let walk out the door 2 years ago. And he's now back. And they've got Malik Davis, Royce Freeman.
Special teams, Royce Freeman.
Yeah, exactly. Rico Dowdle, Deuce Vaughn. Not really a murderer's row there of running backs. And so you expect that they're going to throw a ton. Dak Prescott, 6 different games last year with at least 25 or more fantasy points. That led all quarterbacks. He led the NFL in completions, in completion percentage, passing touchdowns, and in fantasy points per game over the final 12 games. From week 6 on, Dak Prescott was the number 1 quarterback in fantasy. And to your point, he's barely being drafted as a QB1 in most leagues. And so I agree with you. I am no Cowboy fan. I am not a Dak Prescott fan from a real life NFL perspective, but from a fantasy perspective, I think he's being massively overlooked.
Yeah. After the thing with Dak is that after the San Francisco game on Sunday Night Football in week 5, he had an incredibly soft slate of defenses, and we know that he's incredible in the dome, but he's going to be playing in the dome again, and he's going up against the NFC South, other teams in the NFC East. He's going to be lighting these teams up again. And I think a reasonable expectation for Dak is, say, what he did more in 2021, where he was QB7 and he got through the season healthy. I think that is probably I think that's a reasonable expectation for him, because the thing with Dak is that I think he just got a lot better at the quarterback position last year. He just had a greater mastery of the offense. He was playing with great confidence, and particularly when you can call him a front runner if you want to, because he has struggled outdoors against really good defenses. But I think that he's just going to compile stats in the dome with CD. The offensive line is going to be a little bit worse, I think, and that would be the concern. But Dak's 31. There shouldn't be a big drop-off coming.
The Rotoworld Fantasy Football Draft Guide is now available exclusively through a new partnership with Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Get a Fantasy Life Plus subscription and receive the Rotoworld Draft Guide plus fantasy, DFS, and betting tools to help you dominate your draft and the season. Use promo code ROTOWORLD10 for 10% off. Go to NBCSports.com/fantasylife to learn more. What a deal, Matthew.
It's really good, by the way. And I've asked them, see if we get like a Connor 5 and a J1.
I was going to say, where'd our promo codes go?
Yeah, we got to get that going. But yeah, no, really excited about the partnership between NBC Sports, Rotoworld, obviously, and Fantasy Life. These tools that we have at Fantasy Life, the Fantasy Life Plus tools, are really, really amazing. Our draft champion, wait till you try the draft champion. You obviously get the Rotoworld Draft Guide as well. All sorts of tools and analysis. Go check it out. But I'm just telling you, these tools are so incredible. Like, it will help you draft. By the way, you can draft against like an AI version of me. It will rate your draft. It will grade it. Like you can whatever kind of system. Like if you're in a league where like your producer screws you over and like while he's supposed to be working on your show, he snags like Bo Melton and Jonnu Smith. You can put that into the draft champion. It's completely customizable to whatever your settings are, and then you can sync it with your league, and so it'll suggest free agents and trades to make, and it's honestly, it's a really terrific thing. So NBCSports.com/fantasy life to check out more. The Fantasy Life Plus and Rotoworld Draft Guide combo is really good. Really, I'm super excited about it, honestly.
AI Matthew Berry is terrifying. Feels like one of the robots that turned on Will Smith in iRobot.
Where's this going to end up?
Yeah. Who do you think AI Matthew Berry is going to turn on, Jay?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Me and Bo Melton.
Pretty much.
And Davian.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's continue our quarterback storylines here. Let's get into the deeper cuts.
Hey, real quickly, before we move on to the quarterback storylines, I just want to. Well, no, we're going to get to somebody else here in a second that I obviously want to talk about. But I just, in terms of, this is not somebody that's going to come up, but just as long as we're talking about guys that I think are completely underrated in terms of quarterback, Dak is one of them. The other one, very quickly, Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray has number one quarterback in fantasy upside, and he's been going as like somewhere between QB7 and QB9 in a lot of drafts. I love Kyler Murray. Love Kyler Murray this year. We'll talk more about him later on. When Love Hate comes out, 100 facts will be out soon. There'll be a bunch of facts about Kyler Murray. I'm big into Kyler Murray this year. I think Kyler Murray is going to have a monster season, and I think people are sleeping on Kyler Murray.
I think there's a case they have.
He's on the ride or die list too. I'm not saying he is the ride or die, but I'm just saying he is on the ride or die list. He's on the short list.
I think the Cardinals might have the most underrated running back as well. Anyone realize James Conner was like third in the NFL for rushing yards per game last year? Like, no one talks about him ever. He's just really, really good. But yeah,
the addition. He was a top 10 fantasy quarterback once he came back last year as well. The addition of Marvin Harrison Jr. obviously is a massive upgrade. We all love Trey McBride, friend of the podcast, and the human Dortch, Greg Dortch. Don't sleep on him. I thought Michael Wilson had some nice moments too. The defense is terrible. Obviously, you've got the rushing upside with Murray as well. I think there's a lot there for a very good fantasy season for Kyler Murray. And I think just because of the injuries and some of the, he plays video games instead of studying the playbook, all the BS rumors and everything like that. I think people are just down on Kyler Murray for some reason. And I think that's a mistake.
Matthew, can the same be said, not on this level, but with the same thought process, on the rookie in Jayden Daniels? Is he going underdrafted right now when considering his immense rushing upside? This is a guy that rushed for over 1,000 yards the last 2 years of college.
Yeah. Also, by the way, also on the short list for ride or die,
Shocker.
as is Anthony Richardson.
There's the stunner of the show, folks.
Yeah, as is Sam Howell. Still, so we'll see. We're playing through all of it. There are a lot of people on the short list at the moment. I've got about 15 names on the ride or die short list, 15 to 20 at the moment. You narrow it down. There's a process. It's a process, Connor. But I think with Jayden Daniels, or as I like to call him, future Hall of Famer, future Super Bowl champion Jayden Daniels, this is somebody that easily could be a top 5 fantasy quarterback. Like, again, you mentioned the rushing, like over 1,000 yards each of the last 2 seasons at LSU. He had over 2,000 yards and 21 rushing touchdowns. 21 rushing touchdowns in his 2 years at LSU, obviously playing against SEC defenses as well. Last year, there were 5 quarterbacks, right? There were 5 quarterbacks that rushed for at least 400 yards, and they averaged 19.9 fantasy points per game. I think 400 yards is easily within the realm of possibility for Jayden Daniels, right? Think about Cliff Kingsbury, who's the offense coordinator of the Commanders, when he was in Arizona with the aforementioned Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray was a top 5 fantasy quarterback on a points per game basis under Cliff Kingsbury. And so does Jayden Daniels have the greatest set of weapons? No, but I mean, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, the ghost of Zach Ertz. I do think there's enough there that he's going to be able to, and obviously then the upside rushing with the legs. Give me Jayden Daniels. Like, once you get outside the top 10, who's the quarterback that has the most upside? Who's the guy going from 11 to 20 that could wind up as a top 5 guy that could be this year's CJ Stroud? It's Jayden Daniels, and I don't think it's particularly close.
Jay, and a guy looking for that is Trevor Lawrence right now. I mean, he's yet to finish a season as a top 10 quarterback in points per game. Did have a career high 25 passing touchdowns. We know how banged up he was. Is this finally the year that Trevor Lawrence has that breakout fantasy season?
I mean, I think he's going to be better than he was last year, certainly, just when you think about the health and the just absurd array of maladies he was dealing with. He had a sprained knee at one point. He had shoulder. He got concussed. He missed the game late in the season. It was the CJ Beathard show. So I think he just had a lot of ill-timed drops that he had to combat as well. Think about the glaring one at the end of week 18 against the Titans, where Calvin Ridley drops the ball that effectively costs them their season. And other drops earlier in the season too. They really should have beaten the Chiefs early on, if not for drops. So I think between improved health, between the fact as well that he's still young enough that you have to regress a little bit to the fact that he was a generational quarterback taken at number 1. Spoken about, I'm not sure the exact degrees, but I mean, he wasn't far off the Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning type of territory. And that guy is still there, and he shows the flashes. It's just that there are these occasional moments of madness. So look, points per game, he wasn't top 10, but in terms of just actual production, because he played the full season in 2021, he finished as QB8. I think that is certainly within the realm of possibility if he does stay healthy, but just wonder a little bit about the complete upside because we haven't seen it, but certainly haven't given up on Trevor Lawrence yet.
I think just very quickly, I think, signing Gabe Davis, drafting Brian Thomas, yes, Ridley leaves, but they've got Christian Kirk back and Evan Ingram. And I just remember talking to Doug Peterson at the combine, and I said, how do you think Trevor played last year? And he says, good, not great. And so you add that to the injury history, and I think that they've tried to, Doug Peterson is still going to be a pass first, former quarterback, former Andy Reid disciple. He's always going to be a pass first offensive guy, and so I do think, to your point, Jay, that guy is still in there. And Lawrence last year is somebody who still was throwing deep, was still top 10 in average depth to target in terms of throws, and was throwing deep. He just didn't have anyone coming down with the ball. And so I think adding Thomas and Davis this season, the offseason, letting Kirk play in the slot more, which is his natural position. He had to move outside a lot more last year than I think they wanted him. They like him more in the slot. I'm more bullish on Trevor Lawrence this year than you are.
We have some reoccurring themes on this show, guys, whether it's Kenyon Drake, Cedric Tillman, movie talk. How about Jared Goff playing indoors talk? I feel like it's a reoccurring theme like no other.
And
Matthew,
everyone's now finally caught on. Like, we've been on it for like a year
Yeah.
and a half, and
I
like
know it's a
finally
hot
people are
topic.
I'm seeing a lot of people now out there getting
Well,
into
it's
it.
going to be huge this year, Matthew, because the Lions only play 3 outdoor games this year. How much does that boost Goff in terms of his fantasy ADP and outlook?
Yeah, I mean, I think significantly so, right? I mean, like when playing indoors over the last 2 seasons, the average is 18.3 fantasy points per game. That's a QB1 right there. Another year, again, Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown. We're hearing great camp reports about Jamison Williams as well. When Jared Goff has a clean pocket, he's as good as any, well, not as good as any quarterback in the NFL. It's still not Mahomes, but I mean, he's very good. Jared Goff in a clean pocket is very good. The Lions gave him the big deal. And we like his weapons. We like the play calling. The fact that Ben Johnson stuck around Detroit and gave the middle finger to my Commanders, I think is good ultimately for Jared Goff. Now, it is worth noting two of those 3 outdoor games come in week 16 and 17 at Chicago and at San Francisco. So there is a chance that, you ride Jared Goff to the playoffs, but come the semis and finals, you may have to think about something else, but worry about that when you get there. I'm a big Jared Goff fan. I think he's underrated as well this year. Again, as you sort of look at those guys in the 10 through 20 range, Goff has QB1 upside clearly because he's that good when he's indoors, and he's going to be indoors this year a lot.
Jay, looking over at Seattle, staying in the NFC here, new offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb. He was with Washington the last 2 years with that Michael Penix-led offense. That same offense during his 2 years at Washington led the FBS in passing yards. How do you think this impacts Seattle's pass game with Geno Smith a little banged up right now, but expected to be okay? But an offense that, much like Washington had, has 3 capable wide receivers.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much it's going to change just because the personnel is largely the same. And last year, Seattle, under Shane Waldron, they were 9th in passing rate over expected. So they did throw the ball a fair bit last year already. And it's still Metcalf, Lockett, JSN. I'd expect just the natural evolution of that offense is going to mean that JSN is more pronounced in the offense and he gets more target share than he did last year, probably more at the expense of Lockett than Metcalf. I think the quarterback situation is the most interesting, and whether like Geno's kind of the guy there and has played pretty well the past 2 years, but certainly don't think he is super entrenched given that, they have Sam Howell now, and there are worlds where Sam Howell is the starting quarterback at some point. I'm not sure how long the leash will be on Geno. Like, he's not going to get benched after one bad game, but if he has a rough first month, then the murmurs might start to get a bit louder. But I mean, you would have watched a lot more Washington than I did, Connor. What are you expecting from the offense?
I'll say when you look at this with Grubb is that, first off, this is a guy that just had 3 wide receivers drafted in the top 100 in the same draft. So that's a good sign, right? One went in the top 10, another went in the top 40, another went in the top 100. Seattle last year, in terms of 11 personnel, they were under 64%, having those 3 wide receivers on the field only 63.8% of the time. Those 2 years at Washington with Grubb, over 77%. So I think the good news is there's a world where more Lockett, Metcalf, and JSN together, Matthew, where instead of playing the game of who's in, who's out, who takes the next step, I think all 3 will be on the field a lot more in this offense.
I think they will. And again, he just got a little bit banged up, but Noah Fant on the list of tight end sleepers. I know, like, we're, stop me if you've heard this before, Noah Fant, tight end sleeper. But again, somebody that profiled as a very athletic tight end coming out of college. Not a lot of competition for targets. Will Dissly now with the Chargers as well, like in terms of targets from the tight end position. So I do think Fant's going to be on the field a lot more this year. It's going to be a more pass happy offense. So I kind of like Noah Fant, but we'll get into that when we talk about tight ends. To your point about this offense, I do give me JSN over Tyler Lockett. DK Metcalf is still the alpha, but I agree with you, Jay. Like, this is a new staff that wants to win. They inherited Geno Smith. They traded for future Hall of Famer Sam Howell, still his name. So there's definitely a much shorter leash on Geno than there was last year, I think, as well. So I don't mind Geno, but I'm at QB 23. There are other guys that I like sort of in that range that I think have more upside. I think Geno's like best case scenario is if he is QB like 16. You know what I mean? Like that, so but I think the important thing on Geno is just whether can he get the ball to Metcalf, to JSN, to Lockett and Fant, and I think the answer is yes.
Our final quarterback storyline here, guys. After Dave Canales, brings Baker Mayfield back to life last year, the simple question
Geno
is,
Smith the year before.
Right. Track record for Dave Canales with quarterbacks trying to get their careers back on track. Can he do the same for Bryce Young with the Panthers?
I think he can. I'll take this one, Jay. I think he can. Now, can he get him back on track the way that we care about him in fantasy? Maybe not. But there's nowhere to go but up for Bryce Young. Jay, I know, Connor, I know he was still your number one quarterback coming out of the draft. This kid didn't just suddenly forget how to play football. There's talent. There's a high football IQ there. They have, give the Panthers credit. They are like, okay, it didn't work last year. We didn't give Bryce Young very much to work with. We're going to do everything we can to make Bryce Young work this year. Right. And so they draft Xavier Leggett. They go out and get Deontay Johnson in the offseason. They improve the offensive line. And again, they hire Dave Canales, who has a great track record of sort of reclamation projects with quarterbacks as well. Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis improving on the offensive line as well. Baker and Geno both had over 4,000 yards under Dave Canales. And so I don't know that Bryce Young as a fantasy asset is interesting other than maybe in a 2 QB league into a deeper 2 QB league or Superflex league, Jay. But I do think he's going to improve enough that he makes Carolina pass catchers, that includes Adam Thielen, as well, make some of them relevant, especially Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, it's a more extreme version of the Trevor Lawrence thing where you have to regress back still to the fact that this guy, and for Bryce Young, not much more than 12 months ago, was considered a better quarterback prospect within the league than CJ Stroud. And obviously it's unlikely now, clearly, that Bryce Young's going to have a better career than CJ Stroud. But there is certainly within the realm of outcomes that he is going to be much better, then he's going to resemble more of a number one pick. I mean, he just had no hope last year. And even with no hope, you would have hoped that he showed a little bit more. Think back to Trevor Lawrence's first year in Jacksonville, which was just a complete disaster all around. But Lawrence still had flashes, and I don't think anyone was willing to write off Lawrence the way that people seem willing to write off Bryce Young. But there's still the potential. There's still the upside and the reasons that he went number one. He's going to have a better offensive line. I mean, they overspent there, but it's going to help him this year. Deontay Johnson's a better weapon than anything that he had last year. Thielen's going to fit much better as a number two than a number one. So I think there is upside. They also have a really easy schedule, which I think is going to help a ton. And so right now, my favorite bet of all these futures markets, Dave Canales is 18-1 to win Coach of the Year, and the Panthers are plus 550 to make the playoffs. That just doesn't reconcile. If the Panthers go from 2-15 to making the playoffs, and Dave Canales gets Godfather Part 3 of his QB reclamation trilogy with Geno and then Baker and then Bryce Young, I think it's going to be very hard for him to not win the award if they make the playoffs, just given what everyone's expectations of that team are. So, look, I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but that's why it's plus 550. But there are worlds that they do. And I think just overall, this is going to look like a much more competent team and better offense than it did last year.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's an odds, I wouldn't say that it's the odds on favorite, but there's a scenario where Baker and the Buccaneers sort of regress without Canales there. They're very thin, right? They're one Mike Evans hamstring away from being what are we doing out here, right? And so they don't have a ton of depth in Tampa Bay. We still don't know. It's interesting. We went through a whole quarterback show. We didn't really talk about Kirk Cousins, but is Kirk Cousins back to being 100%? Because if he's not Kirk Cousins, then Atlanta all of a sudden becomes, not nearly as sexy. And then, who knows what's going on with the Saints and Derek Carr, and your boy Michael Thomas, who's no longer there. Maybe they'll bring him back. But I know you now love Rashid Shaheed, and you're all in it. You bought 3 different A.T. Perry t-shirts. But, just honestly, the South isn't again,
it's the worst division in football. It's the worst.
It's the worst division in football, and it is unlikely that the Panthers make the playoffs, but it is not impossible because they do have a good defense, Jonathan Brooks looks like he's going to be back sooner rather than later. We think he's a special player, good offensive line. Bryce Young is like, league average, and they play good defense. Couple of fumbles go their way kind of thing. Like, all right. You know what I mean? So I'm with you there, Jay. I don't mind that bet at all.
Yeah, and just think about, like, this is the NFL. Like, there's a lot of randomness and variance. Like, last year, did anyone think the Texans were going to go 10-7 and win the AFC South? It was like 25-1. They started 0-2 as well. Like, teams come out of nowhere. The Giants 2 years ago won a playoff game with Daniel Jones as their quarterback. Like, that team was not expected to do anything. Like, there is just randomness, and what gives you the most variance is when you have variance at quarterback. Like, if you have a veteran quarterback who's like, if you have Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, you don't really have that much upside. Like, you have stability, you don't have upside. Bryce Young could be anything still, and he has a ton of upside. And he's the type of guy, and this is the type of team where you want to buy into their high-end outcomes because the variance is at quarterback.
I completely agree. I think people don't appreciate the true variance in the league. I'll give you another great example. I mean, the Texans were a great example. I'll give you another example. I have a friend of mine that bet an amazing, absolutely stunning amount of money on DeMar Hamlin to win Comeback Player of the Year. And that didn't happen. I mean, like, you could buy houses with how much money my friend lost. I don't want to get into who the friend was or how much money it was, but I just, like, a massive amount of money this guy lost on DeMar Hamlin not winning Comeback Player of the Year. Again, variance. Like, it just, things happen in this league that you don't expect.
6 months later, and it doesn't feel any better that Joe Flacco was 300-1 and I wasn't a part of it, but that's okay. We'll get him next time.
You had NBA Sixth Man of the Year. You had that one.
Yeah, Naz Reid. Thank you, Naz Reid.
There we go.
Thank you, Naz.
Guys, that's it for us. If you want to come back for more A.T. Perry Scherzi references and Comeback Player of the Year callbacks, we're back Friday with the same format, the biggest running back storyline. So, Jay, I know you have a lot to say about James Conner, it sounds like. So if you want to return for that, Friday we'll be back with all the biggest running back storylines. And then next week, we are back Monday to Friday. We are back in our studio Wednesday as the Olympics conclude. We will be back at the NBC Sports HQ in our studio. We will eventually be on a more consistent airing schedule as we return 5 days a week, sitting next to each other, guys. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Be exciting.
For better or worse. Yeah.
For better or for worse. In some format, it will be great. For Jay and Matthew, I'm Connor. We'll talk to you Friday.
Peace out.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and Rotoworld.com. And I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched. Or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Rotoworld fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.